Good morning, friends. And as the nation celebrates its first gold medal in the track and field arena of the Olympics, a very warm welcome to you all for Prabodhan Manch Parlay's 24th engagement with our audience. Just prior to the onset of COVID 19, in our last in person engagement with all of you, a young, prolific New Age author had enthralled us with the discourse on the early part of Swatantraveer Savarkar's life. He had then just released the part one of his book on this subject. More importantly, he had adequately whetted our appetite for the next part of the book that he had already started to write. As the nation went through two waves of the pandemic, our author went through all the pains and efforts of writing and publishing the second part, and equally importantly, battled his way through a serious bout of COVID 19 as well. I am very pleased to welcome to Prabodhan Mancha historian and author Dr. Vikram Sampath. Vikram, welcome to our new format, and it's great to see you as sharp and as fit as we saw you a year plus ago.
Thank you. Thank you, Brianti. Thank you.
Vikram, since you definitely don't need any introduction, and neither does this topic, let's delve into our subject straight off. So, to begin with, please tell us a little bit more about the journey of writing part two. What was different this time? And also, how did your own battle with COVID 19 impact you?
Yeah. Thank you very much. And very good morning to everyone. I still, have very, very fond memories, and I keep recollecting to several friends and acquaintances that perhaps the session I had with all of you in January 2020 was one of the best and the most enthralling sessions that I've personally had. The kind of electrifying response that I got from the audience there and the affection that all of you showered on me and my work, I think that's something that it's very, very difficult to replicate. Of course, in this impersonal medium where I can't even see who all has logged in to listen to us this morning, it strips away a lot of that excitement, but nonetheless, at least thanks to technology, we're able to connect and also disseminate our thoughts amongst ourselves. Yes, it was a very, very difficult time, Rugangji, as the rest of the country also battled it. It was very tough times for me in April and May at the peak of the second wave, where I was detected with a very, very it was very serious, where the doctors had actually given up hope of even saving my life, because the virus had almost occupied 85% of my lungs. But then it was, I think, a lot of grit and willpower, which again I kind of draw from my protagonist under difficult circumstances, how to keep your spirits high and fight it out. If he could live and write poetry in the black dungeons of Kalapani for 11 years, then I think 3.5 weeks in the ICU with all those machines all over you was difficult, but certainly the inspiration I was drawing certainly from this man. And many people later told me that probably, at some point when you deeply associate with a subject, you start probably drawing a lot from your protagonist in your life as well. So even if I get 1% of the kind of mental stamina and strength that Savarkar ji had in his life, I think I'd consider myself lucky. Of course, the experience was very, very humbling, and seeing all around me, I saw people dying in the ICU just on a bed to my right and my left, and that gives an immense sense of gratitude for what we have in life. I think the simple thing of just being able to breathe without external support, that very fact which we take for granted in life and run behind many things, personal and professional pursuits, we realize what is actually important, and we have so much to be grateful just to be able to breathe. I can't say I'm back in the pink of health yet. It's still quite a bit of a problem, talking continuously and so on. And the second volume has come in at this time when I'm forced to, talk a lot to media, to everyone, which does take a little bit of a toll on my health. But then nonetheless, I think it was a very important, I almost feel I've written it in the prologue of this book too, that I have, completed a huge responsibility, which destiny probably, chose me to give, which is to throw light on the life and the different aspects of this much misunderstood and unfortunately maligned patriot of this country, someone who had sacrificed so much for this nation, but who's been completely vilified for contemporary political gains or through false narratives and basically lack of knowledge. His opponents, and most often, as I say, even his proponents, I don't think they bother much to read a lot that's been written on him, and more importantly, things that are written by him. And maybe the language also ensures that it doesn't reach mainstream historians and historiography either unknowingly or willfully. But all said and done, I do feel like I had to live to tell this tale and ensure that hopefully, those who are still after 2 volumes of and also lots of references, notes. There's no claim in this in both the volumes that I make just out of my own will and wish, or that I want to make him look good in front of people or correct a wrong. Everything is backed by sources, evidence, archival material, and so on. After all that, still, if people want to hold on to prejudiced views that they have, or they have some constructive criticism of the man and his life, his works, which is possible because he was human and he was bound to err. And I have also brought out his failings in both these volumes. So, but despite that, if someone continues to have prejudiced views, then nobody really can help that. But by and large, those who are sane, sensible, reasonable in life, I'm sure, an in-depth study of both these volumes, going through and doing their own little research work into areas of his life which they want to zero into based on the references and notes that have been given in the back of the book. I think perspectives and perceptions about Savarkarji would change, and that would be, even if a small amount of that happens in the country, I would consider my work well done. And on my part, through platforms like this or through the mainstream media, whatever little knowledge I have gained in the course of this research, I'm trying to disseminate to people and clear some of the misconceptions. As I said, some may be genuine misconceptions due to lack of knowledge. Malicious misconceptions can't be cured, but the other type can be with information passed on. So I do hope that this second volume, Savarkar, A Contested Legacy, also reaches out to the readers just as the last volume did. And I had held on that carrot to all of you, that many of your questions last time I had parked, saying if I answer it right now, then you won't invite me to another event at yours. I was hoping that would be another event in Mumbai followed by a sumptuous lunch, but nonetheless, this format works fine enough, and I hope we can all go back after the talk and have lunches at our respective homes. So thank you very much once again for inviting me, and I hope in the next 45-50 minutes we can discuss various aspects related to this book and to Savarkarji's life.
Thanks, Vikram, for that sort of introduction. And the first question, because that's where I think a lot is written and spoken about. Savarkarji was arrested as a co-conspirator and then acquitted in the case of Gandhiji's assassination.
Yeah.
Evidence revolved around that one blessing, which he said something like Yashasvi Honya to one of the approvers.
Yeah.
So, simple question: was his acquittal due to lack of evidence, or was there really no case against him?
Yeah, so that's a very nice way to begin. I think it's one huge elephant in the room even today when discussions happen around whether he should get the Bharat Ratna and so on. This is brought up all the time. He was one of the assassins of the father of the nation and so on. So I'll probably take a little bit of time to dwell on this, because the way the prosecution built its case was, as you rightly said, on the evidence, so-called evidence of this one person, the police approver Digambar Badge, one of the 9 accused in the case. Now, I've dwelt in detail in the book about the conspiracy itself and all the different conspirators, the investigation that was conducted. And on this, and Badge also gave a few other, outlandish statements that while coming out of Savarkar Sadan, he and Apte and Godse were coming out, and then Apte tells him that Savarkar also told him that the 100 years of Gandhi are over, and now we are going to end his life any time, and that he also advised him to kill not only Gandhi but also Nehru and Suhrawati. So it was very, very outlandish. And so many eyewitnesses themselves, including Madan Lal Pawa, who was a part of the conspiracy, in the testimonies they mention that after he made these confessions before the police, Badge's fortunes in the jail actually improved miraculously. He started getting good food, he started getting liquor, he started getting meat, he started getting everything, all privileges. So it was very, very clear that somebody had to become the fall guy in this whole conspiracy. Now, what is alarming to me was, I've gone through 11,100 pages of the Gandhi murder trial, which are there in the National Archives of India. And what was alarming is that the entire, there was antipathy for Gandhi, no doubt, right, from 1942, 44, the Quit India time, and also when he began this negotiations with Jinnah, and those which went nowhere. Even at that time, Godse and Apte had protested against him in Panchgani, and that became headline news in their Hindu Rashtra Dal Agrani, which later became Hindu Rashtra newspaper. But then it wasn't so much, there was all the time protests, especially in the way the appeasement was going on, the way the refugee problem was being treated and all of that, and partition and the horrors that were associated with that, the communal pogroms, the Bengal massacres on 16th of August, the Deliverance Day and all of that. So so because of this, there was that antipathy nonetheless, but the decision to kill Gandhiji was probably not taken earlier than 12th of January 1948 by these people. Till then, they had these outlandish, plans that let us go and bomb Pakistan Assembly when the assembly is in session, so that everybody is blown up, including Jinnah. Not working on the logistics of how to do it. And by they, I mean these young Turks, the Godse, Apte and all of them. And they were conspiring with a so-called saintly figure in Bombay called Dadaji Maharaj, and trying to procure arms. And there Badge was the arms supplier. Now, they had this plan of the Pakistan bombing, which obviously would have failed. How do you carry all these bombs, go across the border, bomb that assembly? That was crazy in itself. The other plan was to loot the Nizam's treasury, as just like the Kakori case, when the treasury was going from Maharashtra to Hyderabad state. So that also they gave up. When on 12th of January, this news came that Gandhiji was going on a hunger strike, fast unto death, to force the government of India, the free government of India, to hand over 50 crores to Pakistan as per the division of liabilities and assets between the two countries. Now, at the same time, Pakistan was attacking Kashmir. The tribesmen, army men, masquerading as tribesmen, had taken over parts of Kashmir. So the government of India was of the view that this could be a good stick to beat Pakistan with, and say, unless you vacate Kashmir, we will not give you the money. And we could have probably vacated Kashmir completely. In addition, Gandhi also had this other very fantastic dream that since East and West Pakistan were so separated from each other, we should be magnanimous enough as a big brother and construct a road in between these two, which would have actually sliced through the heart of India. And the security, national, security proposition that would have brought up is there for anyone to guess. So there were lots of these claims he was doing, and also talking about only the Muslim refugees, while right in Delhi, outside the Birla House where he was fasting, there were people who were refugees who were saying marna hai to marne do usko, because they were in refugee camps, not in such a pitiable condition, and no one was speaking for them. So the anger actually came up only by around 12th of January. And within 7 days, by 20th of January, these guys, amateur, they were not professional killers or anything. So amateur, criminals had managed to make a first attempt on Gandhi's life on 20th of Jan, which failed. And it was a comedy of errors, which I mentioned in the book as to how the thing failed. But between 20th and 30th of Jan, the government of India, the government of Bombay state, and also the police force in both Delhi as well as in Bombay had 10 days to connect all the dots, to connect the, apprehend all the suspects. Godse and Apte were roaming freely across the country and nobody was catching them. And Gandhi literally became a sitting duck by the time, he was finally shot on 30th. So in all of this, in just that 1 week that they had between 12th and 20th of Jan, the probability that actually they went and took Savarkar's blessings, and that too based on flimsy evidences like the Shanta Modak, that film actress who said, I dropped these people at Savarkar Sadan. She did not see them going inside. And also the Savarkar Sadan in Dadar, it was a multi-story building and Savarkar stayed at the second floor. The Hindu Mahasabha office was in the first floor. You also had the press office there. So a lot of people were moving in and out, the Hindu Mahasabha people, and these characters were all members of the Hindu Mahasabha. So it was natural, even if they did go to Savarkar Sadan, they would have probably gone to the office or read some newspapers there, and it was open to everyone. But very few people were getting access to Savarkar too at that time, because he had just suffered very, very serious heart attacks in 46 and so on, and his life was almost on the precipice. So he was very, very averse to meeting people. So in all of that, also allowing a stranger, at least Apte and Godse were known to him very well from the Hindu Mahasabha days and the Hindu Rashtradal time. But then to allow a stranger like Badge inside, whom he did not even know or trust, and to say this so openly, that Yashasvi Honya in front of them, and that Yashasvi Honya could have meant for anything else, that they were activists of the party, so they were probably doing some campaign, and for that there is no corroborative evidence to suggest that this was all a plot that was hatched to kill Gandhi at the behest of Savarkar. And most people also say even the gun was given to him by Savarkar, which is again also false. It was given by Dr. Parchure in Gwalior, much later, towards the end of, closer to the 30th of January. But all through this was a botched up case, which Nagarwala, Jamshedji Nagarwala, who was the deputy commissioner in Bombay, and also Sanjeevi, the intelligence head in Delhi, the miscommunication between the two. I elaborately mentioned this whole comedy of errors again. I mean, one of the important officials who was given Madan Lal's statement after Madan Lal was caught on 20th of January, it was written in Urdu. Now, this is handed over to Rana, one of the CID officials. He should have taken a flight and come straight from Delhi to Bombay and discussed it with Nagarwala. Instead, he takes his own sweet time, goes by train, then he parks a little at Allahabad, gets down, there is Kumbh Mela happening there, so has his Shahi Snan, all of that, and then slowly comes all the way to Bombay by when it is almost 28th and 29th of January. And even then, it's all in Urdu, so Nagarwala says, I don't understand Urdu, so we can't do anything, because he was fixated in his mind that it was Savarkar who is responsible, and immediately he put his house under surveillance. And somewhere I think the politics of the time played a big deal in that, where the Morarji Desai, who was the home minister in Bombay at that time, his antipathy for Savarkar and the competitiveness that was in play, and of course the antipathy from Nehru and the government of India, which was evident. And I mentioned this not only on my own account, but also I'd like to mention how the Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, the law minister then, himself, his account I actually quote in the book, where he says, he calls up Bhopatkar, the lawyer of Savarkar, and says, I want to meet you in a particular place in Delhi. Ambedkar himself is driving the car, and then he asks Bhopatkar to hop into the car. They go a certain distance, and then he says, there is absolutely no case against your client. He's being fixed. in this case. And since there's very little evidence, he will get away. And in fact, the entire cabinet is also deeply divided about implicating someone like this, because he was a major opposition party and a major opposition leader in the country, especially after Muslim League went away. So stifling all the political opposition at any cost. This is probably one of those things that your reputation is besmirched forever. And this long dark shadow of the murder can keep coming at you even after you're acquitted. So the police actually confiscated about 10,000 documents from Savarkar's house, out of which there were about 200 letters that were exchanged between Godse and Apte right from the early 1940s. And nowhere in those did the police find any mention of this kind of a discussion. In fact, in my book, I also mentioned that one of Savarkar's accomplices also mentions that when he was in Ratnagiri in the 1930s, he had just casually brought this up, saying, what if Gandhiji gets assassinated? And Savarkar admonishes him and says, please don't even talk such things, because our bullets are only reserved for the British oppressors. We are not to kill one of our own. He's an Indian. He's a great tall leader. And we may completely oppose his ideology, but ideological opposition doesn't mean he's an enemy and that he deserves to be bumped off. And this actually tied back even to what had happened in the early 1900s, when Gopal Krishna Gokhale, who was suspected by several revolutionaries to be passing on some of the secrets of the revolutionaries to the British, when he is on a tour to London, many of these revolutionaries of Abhinav Bharat wanted to kill him as well. And that time too, Savarkar had admonished them, saying, don't even dream such things. First of all, we are not killing a fellow Indian, a great leader. We have deep opposition to his politics, but then that is separate. So finally, Godse's own testimony in court, where, of course, he went out of his way to say, Savarkar and I hardly we knew each other, and same with Savarkar. He went out of his way to disown Godse. And I think that was a wrong thing to do, where they were close associates, to even say that I didn't even know them, and that, they were as close to me as so many others in the Mahasabha. That was being a little stretching the truth a bit. But Godse himself in his testimony said that after 1946, we got disillusioned with Savarkar and his pacifist views, including after independence, when most of the Hindu Mahasabha people did not, want the tricolor, and they wanted the Bhagwa Dhwaj for India. Savarkar said, now we have to accept the fact that it's a free, independent government of India run by Indians, and so we should support it. We may have differences, they may have some shortcomings. Let's work together. And so he had hoisted both the flags, the Bhagwa Dhwaj and the tricolor, on his house. So all of this, and when Godse and Apte also, disrupt Gandhiji's meetings and prayer meetings and all that, even then Savarkar supposedly he had admonished them about it. So Godse says in his testimony that because of all this, we had got disillusioned. We broke away from the old faction of Dr. Munje and Savarkar and others, and we decided to chart our own course. So that is one reason why I think, despite all this linkages, they had associations, but then the fact that he was a main brain behind the assassination was, it was not decreed by the court for lack of evidence, as is made out. It was decreed because there was no evidence that this could have happened. Just this gossip that, he told this and that and that. And the two others who were also key in that thing were Gajanan Damble, who was Savarkar's secretary, and Appa Kasar, the bodyguard. Now, interestingly, both of them also gave it under police coercion. It was a police witness that they were, and they were arrested the day after Gandhi's murder, and they were made to say something in the police station, but they were never brought to the court. The Red Fort trial of Justice Atmacharan, two important evidences on the basis of which this Yashasvi Honya would have actually been substantiated, they were not interrogated in court. Neither were they interrogated by the Kapoor Commission decades later, which actually saw 101 witnesses, but these two principal witnesses on whose testimony this whole thing stood, they were not cross-examined, which itself said that there were lots and lots of loopholes. And what Ambedkar probably surmised about the case not being strong enough was what worked. And among all the 9 accused, most of them, Godse and Apte, of course, were executed, but all others spent significant amount of. Digambar Badge was, of course, let off because of being a prover. But the only person who was honorably exonerated by the court was Savarkar, and I think that should stand water now.
Absolutely. One question, I think it's a sensitive one. The reaction in the society to Gandhiji's assassination was followed by, a period of violence, especially targeted against a particular community. Yeah. Now, you talk about it openly, but my question to you is twofold. In a country that has not accepted that we can have genocide here, 84 Sikhs, 90 Pandits is another example, but you've brought it to the fore. Some more details, and do you think we will have some reaction to this now?
There should be a new hashtag with BL. What is that? BLM, Black Lives Matter, saying Black Lives Matter too. Because I mean, many people in the course of, I'd heard of this. In fact, my mother being from the same community, her extended family, there were people whom she had mentioned in passing were also victims. They had nothing to do with politics or with even the Sangh or anything, but they had to face the brunt of this, and many of them were killed. So we I'd heard of this vaguely, but I didn't know that there was actually such a concerted pogrom that was conducted against the Maharashtrian Brahmins. Initially, anybody with that surname Godse was caught, identified, and literally burnt alive. And later on, the antipathy spread to all the Chitpavan Brahmins and then even the Deshasthas. A lot of it was pent-up feeling, perhaps, because right from the time of the Peshwas, the Chitpavans were in positions of power and authority. They had huge lands and all of that. And so there was that anti-Brahmin feeling, especially among the non-Brahmin community of Maharashtra. So this was a nice way to just erupt in their face, a handle that they got. But that doesn't, of course, justify what happened. And in fact, the cast of the murderers was leaked out to the press within a few hours of the murder, which seldom happens, where, and the Kesari, when it actually called these people as Maratha murderers, there was a huge outcry, and the Kesari also had to publish an apology saying, we didn't mean the community, we just meant they were Maharashtrians and not, the Maratha community as such. So the press in India also largely blacked out this whole issue, that there were riots in which Brahmins were specifically targeted for the only fault that the main assassins were Chitpavan Brahmins. So it was actually the New York Times journalist Robert Trumbull who first reported on 31st of January 1948 that there were communal riots that were sweeping Bombay city, but no details further. In the 50s, I drew a lot of my sources from this scholar Maureen Patterson, who in the 50s came to Maharashtra, and she wanted to get into the details of this case. But she writes that the Maharashtra government then, and also the police, they refused to share documents with her. So from whatever little fragment she managed to collect, and few maybe eyewitnesses who were still around because it was just a few years old, she surmises that the property damage could be anything from 6 to 10 crores, in that time, which was a huge amount, which too, she says, is a gross underestimate. And on the number of lives lost or the number of people killed and hurt and injured, she says that can never be known because the police completely whitewashed the case. No FIRs were lodged, no cases were registered, so we would never know. And from Bombay, Pune, Nagpur, it spread to the rest of Maharashtra, the Desh, the Deccan Plateau, Satara, Sangli, Miraj, Kolhapur, the Patwardhan princely states, all of that, where systematically there was an ethnic cleansing of Maharashtrian Brahmins from villages. Even now, I think you don't find too many Brahmins in the hinterland or the villages, where most of them migrated either to the cities, Bombay, Pune, etc., or to neighboring Mysore state and so on, looking for shelter. So, and in fact, in Kolhapur, you also had Balji Bhandarkar's studio also being gutted down. And the Maharaja of Kolhapur actually established a commission of inquiry called the Justice Koyaji Commission, which was, he was a former Bombay High Court judge. Now, this report, it's a 95-page report, which clearly mentioned the role played by both the non-Brahmin leaders and also leaders of the Congress party, because the Congress was the one which in many cases led these riots, just like they did in the 1984 case. And I'm sticking my neck out and saying this openly. I don't know what repercussions that would have for me, but then I'm basing it again on sources and facts. And Dwarka Prasad Mishra, the Congress Home Minister of Central Provinces, he had said in his memoirs, which I quote in the book and right now too, he says, and I quote, although hardly half a dozen Maharashtrian Brahmins were involved in Godse's crime, a very large number of them had to pay for it. Those who indulged in these unlawful activities also included a large number of congressmen belonging to non-Brahmin communities. In fact, in Nagpur and Berar, the troublemakers were mostly congressmen, some even being office bearers of the various Congress committees. Among those arrested by the police, there were more than 100 congressmen, and I was immediately subjected to pressure for their release. In a meeting of prominent congressmen of Nagpur, I had to face severe criticism when they threatened to take their complaint to Home Minister Patel, that I had to tell them to bring a directive for me from Delhi, unquote. So a lot of pressure was put on the Home Minister to release these Congress gundas who had committed these atrocities. And during the course of the research also, through social media, I tried to gather a lot of family stories, the pain of victims of the past. And I was overwhelmed with the deluge of information that came about from so many people. And I think a huge tribute to all of them. Mrugangji, I think one is justice, getting justice, which will never happen in this case because it doesn't even exist in public or historical memory. But the other, and adding insult to injury, is to deny its very occurrence. Least we can do. And that's one reason why I included whoever gave me permission to include their voices in the appendix to the book. The first person account, probably for the first time in print, it's coming out, and for a larger national audience who did not even know. I mean, most people were shocked to even know that something like this had happened. But what was also very eerie, and that talks a lot about the way our country is today and so on, is that many of these individuals who were brave enough to write to me also refused to be named. So most of the testimonies go under anonymous, this thing, because they said, people who either led the mobs and we all know who and so on, and their descendants and the same parties are in very, very powerful positions in Maharashtra today, and we would not want to risk our lives. We have moved on, we've rebuilt our lives. So let's not, and you are sitting away in Bangalore, for you, it may not affect much, but we have to face the brunt. So that very fact that there is so much of fear even now after 70 years, that speaks much more than the incident itself, where we can't even talk about these terrible things of the past, let alone give justice, or let alone do anything to correct it. I always hold, if we had taken the right steps in 1948, maybe 1984 may not have repeated. And that's the strange way of history which repeats itself the first time as a tragedy and the second time as a farce.
So, Vikramji, moving from there, 2 points. One, in general, first, Savarkarji was immediately afterwards, I think, arrested again because he gave a speech on Hindu nationalism. Did the Congress really consider him a big threat even after the Britishers had gone? And second, that whole antipathy between Congress and him, was it widespread, or did he have special relationships with some people? Maybe a Sardar Patel, maybe somebody else.
Yeah.
Your views on that?
Yeah. In fact, immediately after he comes out of jail in 1949 after being exonerated, and a year later in 1950, around the time the Nehru-Liaquat Ali Pact was being signed, he's again. Actually, he had actually made no public statements after coming out of jail. I think he was also a little cautious. He was probably tired and disillusioned or whatever. And in fact, even when the Hindu Mahasabha, brought out letters saying, we will try to see who was the one who fixed you, and also the role of Morarji Desai and all of that. He said, please don't do all this. I've just come out. I don't want to get into this. Leave me alone. So actually, he didn't even make any speeches about anything in that 1 year. He had a personal tragedy. In fact, in these riots, his own younger brother, Dr. Narayan Rao, he was also targeted. There were mobs which had entered Savarkar's house, but he was rescued somehow. But Narayan Rao had his head bludgeoned with stones and so on. And finally, after several months of being in the hospital, he died of a brain hemorrhage. So in the middle of this, there was no way that he indulged in any kind of political rhetoric or speeches. The reason was, again, the Preventive Detention Act that was imposed, very, very draconian manner, where one of the sections of that act said anybody who talks about the dismemberment of a foreign nation is an enemy of the country. And so at that time, when India and Pakistan were signing the Nehru-Liaquat Pact, the very fact that the Hindu nationalist parties were talking of Akhand Bharat and the subjugation of Pakistan and a reuniting of the two countries, the East and West Pakistan with India, that was enough to actually zero in on not only Savarkar but numerous other people, and that clearly showed how much what was the freedom of expression that one had, where any political opposition had to be stifled in this kind of manner. And this continued even even in jail. He had to give an undertaking that I will come out and not indulge in politics till the time the first general elections are over. So it was almost that anyone who was in a political opposition cannot make statements or cannot campaign for till the time elections are over. So it's a unilateral match fixed election where who's going to win, and after that it doesn't matter. You speak whatever you want to speak. So he was actually holed up for several months in jail for doing nothing, but just the fact that his party, his erstwhile party from which he had even resigned, had views that India and Pakistan should be reintegrated into India. But yeah, your other question is also very valid. There were murmurs that there was a kind of a brewing alliance between Sardar Patel and members of the Hindu Mahasabha. In fact, again, that momentous day of 12th January 1948, there was a letter which I quote in the book where Sardar Patel's, on his part, it was Dwarka Prasad Mishra and a few others, and the Mahakaushal Hindu Mahasabha president, they were exchanging letters, and they've written to Savarkar also saying that we were trying to arrange a meeting between you and Patel to chart out the future course of the Hindu Mahasabha. So it was very evident that probably Patel by then was so disillusioned with the Congress government, with Nehru in particular, and he had actually wanted to step down. And from around that time, early January, he was not even attending to his ministry. So the home ministry, which was to take care of Gandhiji's security, was literally leaderless, and it was being handled directly by the Prime Minister then, Nehru. So the lapses also on whose door the responsibility goes was not Patel, as he was insinuated later that as a Home Minister you did nothing to save Mahatma Ji's life and so on. So so there was this dialogue going on backdoor between Patel and the Hindu Mahasabha, and that was no surprise because Gandhi also jokingly had mentioned once that Shama Prasad Mukherjee is the best congressman in the Hindu Mahasabha, and Patel is the best Hindu Mahasabha guy in the Congress. So it was an open secret that they had sympathies. And even on the last person Gandhiji met before he was killed, was Patel and his daughter Maniben. And there Patel again reiterates that I don't want to be a part of the government. And Gandhi tries to mollify him, says, let's try to get together. You and Nehru are my two eyes. So both of you I'll create a settlement over the next couple of days. And the same day, he was also trying to disband the Congress party, which he wanted to convert into an NGO and not a political party, which he thought it had outlived its purpose. So very, very curiously, around this time when all these developments were happening, due to security lapses, Gandhiji was murdered. And who benefited the most out of that is the jury is out for people to see. So, but yeah, these equations, overall antipathy between, I think, Nehru and Savarkar was immense. In fact, I also mention an incident in the book where 1957, 100 years of the 1857 uprising, and for which it was Savarkar who called it the first war of Indian
Yes. Yeah.
independence.
Yeah.
He wrote that seminal book on it. So a lot of people in Delhi had organized a commemorative event to felicitate whoever revolutionaries were still left alive, Bhagat Singh's family and Udham Singh's family, several of them, bring them to Delhi and felicitate them, and also felicitate Savarkar. And the committee that was organizing this actually went to Prime Minister Nehru and said, you should preside over this. And when he saw the list of names and saw Savarkar's name, he supposedly said that I don't want to participate in an event where he is there because, I like his book, the 1857 book, but then it cannot be called as history. It's a lot of poetic flourish and all of that. So it will be embarrassing for both of us if we share stage. So I will come on a later time if you include him. Now, luckily, the committee actually dropped the Prime Minister of India and actually included Savarkar in the felicitation function. And also, I think Savarkar was generous enough when any of these great leaders died, right? From Gandhiji to Patel to Shama Prasad Mukherjee, who had fallen out with him. When they died, he issued, public statements condoling the death. But then it was only when Nehru died that he kept a curious silence. He did not even have want to show that grace, saying, I'd like to feel sorry for this. So I'm sure the animosity between the two was so evident, and probably because of the fact that he was fixed in this case, all because of maybe Nehru's behest.
So today is an important day, as we know, right? Quit India movement and the history behind it. And Savarkarji was supposed to have been opposed to the Quit India movement, therefore also accused of being a little hand in glove with the British Empire. Your take, and I'm sure you've covered this on.
Yeah, it's often brought up, and and it was 7th, 8th August. It was actually launched from your city in Mumbai, the Quit India movement. And I think it's very important to look at it in context that it had just come after months after the failure of the Cripps mission, which had, Stafford Cripps had come to India, and he was willing to. The only party which opposed the Cripps mission was the Hindu Mahasabha, because it said it played with the integrity of the country. It allowed any province to go and join any unit, either India or Pakistan. And so we would have had a bigger Pakistan than what we finally had if that had been agreed upon, or provinces could become independent. So the Congress was actually willing to accept this demand, these proposals of Cripps, mainly Nehru and Maulana Azad, who were negotiating with Cripps. In return for the defense portfolio. So it was almost a certainty in newspapers, both in outside India as well as within India, that Nehru was to become the first defense minister of India if this thing had gone through. But then Gandhi opposed that. And there was a lot of the British writers too, I quote, he was the one who ensured that the Cripps mission failed from the Congress side. The Mahasabha was anyway not interested. Muslim League was not interested because it thought there was no clear enunciation of what Pakistan is and so on. So the failure of the Cripps mission also gave Gandhi an opportunity to reassert himself within the party because his hold was diminishing there. And without much planning, even by his own standards, went ahead and launched this movement at a time when most people, were opposed to it, even within the Congress, because we had a very precarious situation where Japan was at our gates, almost threatening to invade India. The World War was at its peak. At that time, to create this, discontent within the country there was no specific agenda. There was no specific plan of action or program, no directives given to the people or to the party workers. Just this do or die. That could mean anything to anybody. Some could also make it a violent movement also, which it became. And in fact, it was none less than the Congress president then, Maulana Azad, who opposed it. And I'll just read out what he had to say. He says, and I quote, "I could not believe that with the enemy on the Indian frontier, the British would tolerate a movement of resistance. Gandhiji seemed to have a strange belief that they would. He held that the British would allow him to develop this movement in his own way. When I pressed him to tell us what exactly would be the program of resistance, he had no clear idea. apart from Jawaharlal, who often agreed with me, the other members were generally content to follow Gandhiji's lead on any matter. Sardar Patel, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, and Acharya Kriplani had no clear idea about the war. Never before had our, as in his and Gandhiji's differences, been so complete. Things reached such a climax when he sent me a letter to the effect that my stand was so different from his that we could not work together. If the Congress wanted Gandhiji to lead the movement, I must resign from the presidentship and also withdraw from the working committee. Jawaharlal must do the same, unquote. So within the Congress, there was so much of, opposition to the Quit India. Rajgopalachari, who was Gandhiji's most trusted lieutenant and who went on with these Pakistan proposals, even he was aghast where Gandhiji had said, in the CWC resolution of 14th July 1942, it said the Congress did not want to embarrass Great Britain or the Allied powers, and so they can leave, but leave their army behind, which would have actually meant that India would have become a huge, army base for America, for Britain, and so on. Even Rajgopalachari says, and I quote him, "Your proposal that while the civil power may be withdrawn, the British and the Allied forces may continue in India in anticipation of a treaty with a problematic provisional government will only lead to the exercise of all government functions by military forces. This would be reinstallation of the British government in the worst form," unquote. So there was so much opposition. There was no plan of action. Within a few days of the announcement of Quit India, almost the entire Congress top brass, including Gandhiji, was arrested. He was, of course, put up in Aga Khan Palace in Pune. But then with the fact that there was no leaders and no plan of action, people did what they felt like. And most of the movement, it became a bloody, it was a revolution. It was violent movement. The underground revolutionaries, the army men, most of them came out of the woodworks. There was large scale violence all over. And the same Gandhi, who had actually called off the non-cooperation movement just because one small police station in Chauri Chaura was put on fire, the Quit India was a million times more violent movement. And that's one reason the Congress actually disowned themselves from this movement completely. They said, even Nehru said, and I quote him, that the people forgot the lessons of non-violence which had been dinned into their ears for more than 20 years. So it's very easy to say, oh, but Savarkar did not support it, and so he's against the freedom movement and so on. The fact that there was problem in the Congress, there was all the other parties of the time too, Tej Bahadur Sapru or Srinivas Shastri of the Liberal Party, they were opposed to it. Ambedkar, what he says, he called the Quit India movement, and I quote, a treachery to India. And he said it meant playing the enemy's game. And I urge all Indians as a patriotic duty to resist with all the power and resources at their command any attempt on the part of the Congress to launch this civil disobedience at this time. The left parties at that time were playing a more curious role, which again I talk about, where PC Joshi, the General Secretary of the CPI, was acting like a British spy. There are letters between him and Sir Reginald Maxwell, the Home Member of Government of India, saying in return for money, they were actually supplying information about the underground revolutionary movement and also about Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose and the INA, the CPI, the left party, which castigates Savarkar today. They were the ones who were actually, in return for monetary, benefits, they were giving out secrets. And this was claimed by one of their members only, Batliwala, one of their Politburo members, that this was happening on the part of the party, and the letters are all there. I think even Arun Shourie had mentioned it in his book, The Only Fatherland. So it's a very complex time, but today in the age of Twitter, with 240 characters and not seeing so many angles to it, very happily we can pass judgments that he was against. He was certainly against it, that it was a futile jail-filling exercise at a time when we should be entering the army and militarizing ourselves, just sitting and rotting in jail, and with no plan of action saying what is the end result. Quit India or do or die, I mean, it doesn't really make much sense. And the very fact that the movement was crushed within 3 months of its launch showed that it did not have any impact on the British. It scared them that the army, in the army, there was rebellion that was incited because of this movement, which ultimately led to the naval mutiny in Bombay in 1946, which kind of shook the very foundations of the empire.
Vikram, we had asked you this question, and you said I'll reserve it for when I've done part two. So let's get to it. Savarkarji had put forward an economic policy
Hmm.
in the 1939 presidential address to the Akhil Bharat Hindu Mahasabha session in Kolkata.
Yeah.
So what were his views, and especially when today we talk about a lot of things, saying that political leadership needs to talk about economic policies, etc. Economic policies, government administration. What was it that he said?
Yeah. So sadly, I don't think many people would appreciate what economic views he held today in today's context when we are
Sure.
talking of free market and liberalization. But that was a flavor of the time, the socialist model. He stood for nationalization. I mean,
Okay.
nationalization of most of the industries. Of course, he stressed a lot on mechanization, industrialization, rejected this whole Gram Swaraj and the charkha and all of that, and said we are in the age of machines, and so they have to be used for that sake. He also rejected another important thing which the Congress, particularly Nehru, had come about, that there were actually no differences between the Hindus and Muslims other than economic reasons. The dal bhat issue that he spoke of. He said economics is not the only thing that determines differences. There's lots of other things, cultural, civilizational differences, which are also important. But then, he says, I think I'll quote from the book itself, which talks a lot about, what he held. Said, I quote from my book, being the machine age, he welcomed the rapid and widespread mechanization and spread of industrialization, deriding the fanciful means of hand-spun charkha that Gandhi espoused. The peasants and working class formed the fulcrum of the national wealth, and hence their well-being and the reinvigoration of the villages where they lived to make them hubs of economic growth needed to be the goal. But even these classes must keep in mind that being an integral and important part of the nation, they must conscientiously share their responsibilities and obligations towards national wealth creation and national industries. The interests of both capital and labor in Savarkar's worldview were subservient to national interests and requirement. Now, many years later, I mean, just a few, I think, months before he died, the organizer of the RSS, they did a very elaborate interview of him, and I've included the entire interview in the book. And one question that was asked, where he also touches upon his, even towards the end of his life, that nationalization was on his mind, it becomes clear, where he says, they ask him, what is the India of your dreams? And I think this summarizes a lot of what he thought of for the country in October 1965. My India would be a democratic state in which people belonging to different religions, sects, or races would be treated with perfect equality. None would be allowed to dominate others. None would be deprived of his just and equal rights of free citizenship, so long as everyone discharged the common obligation which he owed to the state as a whole. Hindustan, the motherland and the holy land of the Hindus from the Indus to the seas, would be an organic, undivided state. The Hindus would be a casteless society, a consolidated and a modern nation. Science and technology would be encouraged. There would be a total liquidation of landlordism. All the land would belong to the state eventually. That's the socialist
Yeah.
part. All
Yeah.
key industries would be nationalized. India would be self-sufficient in terms of food, clothes, shelter, and defense. The India of my dreams would have unbounded faith in a world commonwealth, because the earth is the common motherland of all, but India would not go down under the evolution of this world commonwealth. The foreign policy of a militarily strong Akhand Hindustan would be a policy of neutrality and peace, and a powerful, centralized state of Hindustan would contribute effectively towards an enduring peace and prosperity in the world. Unquote. So I think this spoke a lot, not only about his economic thoughts, but also his foreign policy, his idea for social reforms for the country, of a complete casteless society, and also secularism, where everybody was to be treated equally, and no community, even the Hindus, will not get extra privileges, and the minorities will not get any extra concessions. Everyone is equal in the eyes of the law, and that is being secular by the true meaning of
Absolutely.
that word.
Yeah. So Vikram, we are conscious of time. In this new format, we try and stick to an hour, because that's what we try and do. So just last two questions for you. Because there's so much in the book that I think the readers will actually be wanting to read the book, but
Yeah.
we want to hear a few things from you. So last two. The first one, the Savarkar of the part one in your book and the Savarkar of the part two is a different persona in some ways, right? For today's India, which Savarkar is more relevant, which Savarkar is more important?
I think the part one, the Savarkar in the volume one, was a young man who was a revolutionary, who started India's first secret society, who did all these brave acts of revolution in London and so on, which has its own role, its own place. But I think if you're talking of relevance to today, I think it's more the mature politician that he became, which is traced in the second volume, where not only an egalitarian social reformer, but also someone who spoke for a consolidation of the Hindu society, both politically, socially, culturally too, and stood for abolition of castes in its complete totality, not just piecemeal reforms, and someone who stood for a strong nation, where national security and using, enemy is enemy is your friend, and there are no permanent enemies or friends in foreign policy. If you have to, national interest should be primary. These kind of tenets, which he, kept propounding even later, that you have to befriend Israel, or he supported the creation of Israel. He constantly warned Nehru's government against China, which he said, we should be cautiously optimistic about all these Panchsheel and Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai and all of that, which we know what happened and what continues to happen now with China. So a lot of that, where it's only when a nation is militarily strong that it earns respect. All these homilies that we've had of high principles, moral principles, if it is unilaterally followed by someone and the rest of the world does not follow, then you don't gain any respect in the world stage. And we've seen that the failure of the non-aligned movement, etc., which we imposed on ourselves, how much it helped the country. And today, are we really non-aligned? Even, of course, when there are there is a new kind of Cold War brewing. Yeah, so new poles. So I think the Savarkar who spoke about all of this, and most important thing of nation first, everything, all these isms, fascism, Nazism, etc., doesn't matter. It is the interest of India that should matter. I think that is the most relevant takeaway from his life for today's generation.
So one last question. I could guess an answer, but I want to hear your views. The legacy, the life of Savarkarji needs to be made permanent and honored with a Bharat Ratna. Your views on that, or are we too late for it also?
It's finally a decision that the government, the Prime Minister of India takes, but then I think people like Savarkarji, whose views are still, as I said, so many things that even this government does, are inspired by his vision. Whether it is the way, we no longer take the enemy lying down or keep sending unilateral olives of peace. Shatrun Chashi Birat, you go inside the enemy camp and beat them, whether it was Balakot or Doklam or wherever else, and ensure that militarily you give a tough, opposition to anyone who's opposed to you. The abolition of Article 370, and which was a matter of principle for the Indian right, whether it was Savarkar or more so for his protege Shama Prasad Mukherjee, and all of them, I mean, Atalji and everyone. So that has also been a fruition of his vision. The abrogation of triple talaq, the talk of, uniform civil code and all of that, in a country where, again, the same vision that I just touched upon of everyone being equal in the eyes of the law. So a lot of this, his legacy that way lives on, even though he's not probably given credit openly or acknowledged. I personally would love for him to get this highest civilian award. But then I think, because I feel the award would be honored if it is given to him, not the other way. But then we've had also precisely for this reason that, we've just had the Khel Ratna being renamed, and rightfully so. We've had for the longest time these awards being cornered by one family or one group of people. Even Patel or Ambedkar, it took so long for Dr. Ambedkar to get a Bharat Ratna, which he should have got in his lifetime. So to that extent, if it is about correcting a wrong, then I think it's high time we correct this wrong very expeditiously, and his legacy is made permanent, especially since all these allegations are really have no historical basis, that would give the man, his views, his legacy, a kind of permanence in the you just historically recording that. But then Gandhiji himself is not a Bharat Ratna. So there are probably a lot of characters like Gandhi and Savarkar and so on who are beyond these awards. Maybe it's easy for, as we've had in the past, for some prime ministers to award it to themselves. The same people who say he was the one who called himself Veer or he wrote his own biography are the ones who also awarded the nation's highest awards to themselves. So it is to that extent, I think to correct it, I would personally would want it to be conferred on him. His own family says they have no such demands, whether it was Ranjit Savarkarji or anybody else. So, but then I think it is important that these awards are democratized. It's made outside the preserve of just one clique that is holding on to all the recognitions and rewards.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Vikram. As we bring this webinar to a close, it is my duty to express a word of thanks. First and foremost, to our speaker of the day, Dr. Vikram Sampath. Veer Savarkar was, is, and will remain an icon for many people. This mantra for sure. It is extremely important for the younger generation and for mainstream India to try and understand the life and legacy of this probably misunderstood son of the soil. So for your exemplary effort in doing this through your books and for spending time with us in spite of your just recent sort of health issues, to speak with our audience, a very big thank you, Vikram. All the best to you for the second book as well. We have already sent the link of this to our audience, and we are very sure that their appetite would have been whetted much more. And we were also very glad to hear from you that the Marathi version is likely to be out very soon. And so is the Hindi version. And we, as Prabodhan Manch, will make sure that even those are made sort of publicized within our audience. So all the best for that, and thank you again. Thanks Tendulkarji and Parag Khoth, as always, for the posters and the technical know-how. Connecting back with our audience has been a rewarding experience for us. We had taken a little bit of break, as some of you know. We now have crossed 10,500 viewers on YouTube. Our sincere thanks to all of you, to the contributors who go a long way. We now have more than 200 plus contributors. And we hope all our audience encourages our speakers of this trilogy that we had recently by purchasing all their books as well. So to everyone in our audience, a very big thank you. Friends, we mentioned this was our 24th engagement. Let us all hope and pray that we can get back for our 25th program in person and in a grand style. But until then, stay safe and stay healthy.